Cairo, Seattle.
It's time to get schooled with the professor, John Clayton.
Welcome to Schooled, and of course the education class today is dealing with officiating, because over the past weekend Dean Blandino got together with all the officials in the National Football League and had a clinic. They do it every year. In fact, I even attended one of the clinics down in Dallas, with the idea being that at that time they were working on keeping everybody in shape. They had tests for all the officials and trying to make sure that their endurance was going to be good, that their weight was at a certain level. And now this one, along with that, is trying to keep everybody educated in the future of the game as far as officiating, because I think you're going to see, and we'll talk to Gerry Austin about it, who works with ESPN and is a former official, that there is a lot of change coming up in officiating, and a lot of it has to do with the technology. But the one thing, and I've always respected the officials in the National Football League. I contend that they're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. It's a very tough game, and as it is in all sports. But I contend that the group of officials in the National Football League are among the best in sports. I think that you can see that there's a good level of integrity. There's a good effort by that. Now, remember, these are part-time guys. And, there's really a minimal effort to try to make them full-time, because the idea is that, what do you really do for all the games that you're not working? I mean, let's say, for example, an official is going to get a chance to work, say, 14 or 15 regular season games. Well, that's 14 or 15 Sundays, or one time a week for 14. So literally, I mean, you're prepping for, I guess you could say, 340 some days for one event. And that may be a little bit too much to take on full time. Now, you look at the pay is very good. With the union that the officials have, they've been able to take salaries into the 6-digit area. Top ones make as close to $200,000 as possible, and they earn it. They have a lot on their minds, a lot on their hands to try to get the officiating right. But now it's a different challenge, because of television. Television has made it such that you can go on a big screen TV and in some cases get a better view of a play, along with a quick review of the play, than an official who has one chance to see it and one chance to see it only, and they're out there, running around, dodging bodies, trying to get themselves into position to make the right call. And so it seems like it's easier than it is, but you don't know the obstructions that you see. But this is now going to create the deeper challenge, because now you can go back, and in New York, they've got the same shots that you're going to see on TV and maybe a few more, and they're going to assist the officials. The technology is such that you can now have communication that wasn't there before, where all the officials can communicate without having to go into a huddle. Everybody's going to be mic'd up, and they're starting to phase, and this is what Dean Blandino started to talk about this past week, where they're going to put chips in footballs, and they're going to really start to break down how things are as far as the game itself, and take advantage of all the technology. I think that in time, you're going to probably see the referees be phased out of being the ones that are going to make the main decisions on replay, because when you look at the execution of a play, and of course they go back and replay, they have to notify both coaches that this is going to be a replay. And by the time that they do that, I mean, back in New York, they can already make a decision on what the play is going to be and what the call is going to be. So now what you see is the referee comes over, sticks his head under the hood, and he's getting guidance from New York and getting the ideas. It's like, okay, take a look at this, what's your thoughts? And they're going to speed up the time to a point where you got a little less than 1 minute to go in there and make a quick decision. By doing it that way, you can speed up the game, and maybe in the future you can expand the replay into different things. Now, Bill Belichick's been pushing for several years to try to get most things included, including interference calls, any kind of a play that is going to have an official's judgment, where the resistance from the owners and the National Football League is that it could add too much time. And of course, Bill Belichick will say, hey, we only get a couple challenges a game. That's not going to eat up that much time, and it can correct some big plays that may have gone right or may have gone wrong, depending on that, if it's an interference call downfield. So that's in the future. But let's go to the past. And I think that you can see that dynasties have been made on a bad call or a good call, or you can see that you can see a change of events. I mean, go back in Seattle's history and look at the Hail Mary pass in the Green Bay game a couple years ago, where, here's Golden Tate in the end zone, and it looked like he didn't have the catch, yet, with the replacement officials out there, there was no communication between the replacement referee and those in the end zone, and you had two different opinions. One said catch, one said no catch. And I know literally I was standing about, I'd say 10 feet away from the referee, and his job is supposed to be to go and consult with them and then make a decision. All he did was run over and get under the hood, and of course the replay official couldn't do anything to make a change because Howard Slavin was the official at that time as far as the replay official, and he was he's a lawyer in Los Angeles who's been working with the league many years, because the referee did not make the call on the field. I mean, it was poor execution, but a great play for Seattle, and you can see that boosted up now what's turning into a mini dynasty. Go back into New England's past, where you look at Tom Brady and the incredible play that happened when the Oakland Raiders are going in there, and they reach for him and they think they get a fumble, but it didn't happen. It turned out to be an incomplete pass because of the tuck rule. And what was the tuck rule? The tuck rule was a silly idea that they had to make it easier for officials, where they said for a ball to be a fumble, you have to bring the football all the way down to your belt buckle, and if it goes before that and the ball comes out, it's an incomplete pass. Well, how many quarterbacks are going to be throwing from their belt buckle? Yet that rule stayed in existence until one Sunday. And I remember I was in Pittsburgh for a game, and in that game there was one of these tuck rules, and it actually happened 2 more times that same day, and all in the first half. I mean, literally within a 30-minute period, here were 3 tuck rule calls, and it woke up the people. And I remember Mike Pereira, who was the supervisor officials for many years, was on Fox at that time, and he tweeted out, hey, it's time to change the tuck rule. And sure enough, they did. And so they removed that silly rule, but it should have been really a fumble for the Raiders, and probably the Raiders getting the win in the playoff game. Instead, it went to the Patriots. But those things happen so much. Go back into my history when I was covering the Pittsburgh Steelers, and literally I was in high school at the time, and I was working for a paper in St. Mary's, PA. You had Franco Harris and the Immaculate Reception. Well, really, when you really, because that replay wasn't around back then, replay might have overturned that, because the ball hit off of Frenchie Fuqua on the hit when the Raiders hit him, and the way the rules read back then, if it bounces from one offensive player to another offensive player, it should be ruled an incompletion, or it wasn't going to be a completion. Yet here comes Franco Harris making the catch, coming down, and I was literally sitting in the auxiliary box in the end zone, and this is, of course, at Three River Stadium. It's really the baseball press box, and there was a lot of reporters who were actually Steeler fans, and they were up there and cheering. And so my first reaction, I turned to Joe Brown, who at that time was working public relations for the National Football League. I turned to him, and I'm 17 years old at the time. I said, we got to look at a replay on that. That's a fumble. And, there was actually a look at it, but they did not overturn it. And it turned out to be, one of the things that helped get the Steelers on board as now one of the dynasties. They didn't go to the Super Bowl that year, but it really gave them the confidence that they can win in the playoffs. Officiating is a big thing, and I really do think that, you look at this group, and there's going to be a lot of changes this year in the sense that they're shuffling up crews. They've now added up to a point now where they have 124 officials in the National Football League, but you're going to see more of an influence with New York, more of an influence with them taking a look from New York and trying to, get things right. They're going to now double check the time elements, because sometimes you get officials and referees that don't necessarily let a few ticks off the clock that shouldn't happen, and they got to make sure with the ball placement, they're even putting the chips in the football to help make judgments on things, and they're going to experiment with that. A lot of experimenting, and of course with experimenting, what they're trying to do is clean up the game as best possible. But the one thing that cannot happen, unfortunately, is perfection. You have human beings making decisions, human beings that are caught sometimes in a very difficult position to maybe make a look, make a see, and try to make the right call. And so you are going to have the mistakes. But if there's ways to kind of make that a little bit better, and I'm not saying expanding the number of replay calls, because again, that goes into the length of the game, but just making it a little bit cleaner. The one thing that's now starting this year is that Dean Blandino said that they are going to give a little bit more instruction when they're talking to the referee and talking to the decision makers to say, here's the interpretation of that rule to make sure that there's no confusion on it. And of course, every official is judged on each call that they make. If you make a couple bad calls, you're going to be downgraded to the point where you're not going to be able to advance into playoff games and get a little bit more money, or have the ability to cover a great game. But instead, there's going to be always that incentive to make sure that everybody's good. And believe me, this group of officials, they're very solid as far as where they go. They want to do the best job possible, and so you look at it and say, you know what, you got to give them the break. But of course, fans don't necessarily do that. When they see a wrong call, they don't like it. But really, officiating is a big part, and we'll talk to Gerry Austin about that, what's going on with officiating and putting it up to date here on Schooled. Welcome back to Schooled, and we're pleased to be joined by Gerry Austin, who breaks down all the officiating decisions and talking about it for ESPN on the Monday night games, and helps us overall try to make sure that everybody in the company understands the rules. And Gerry, thanks for joining us. And let's start out kind of getting a big picture. You were just down in Dallas where they had the clinic for the officials, as they have it every year. Kind of give us a big overview right now of officiating in the National Football League.
One of the things I believe the competition committee is trying to accomplish is simplify the rules. They have gotten so complicated. I was looking the other day. I had bought at an auction a 1970 rule book, and it's a small 4x6 book that's about 1/3 as thick as the current rule book, which is a 10x11 book. So it's the rules have really gotten complicated, and every time a situation has come up, they've added a new rule or an exception to a rule. So that's the first thing I believe they're trying to do, is simplify it. Another thing, they're still working on the safety aspect. They've taken the chop block out. In the past, a chop block was legal on a running play, but not on a pass play. Now, chop block is prohibited on a pass play. And they've even, on the peel back blocks or blindside blocks, those blocks must be within the body of the person that's receiving the block. In other words, the blocker has to hit between the shoulders and the thighs. There's no more going low or going high on those blocks that catches the other person, the opponent, by surprise. The play which most injuries have occurred, serious injuries in the past, has been kickoffs. So now they've, about 4 years ago, they moved the kickoff up to the 35-yard line, which created more touchbacks. And now, to encourage even more touchbacks, they have said if it becomes a touchback on a kickoff, the receiving team will get the ball at the 25-yard line instead of the 20. So those are the most important aspects of the rules that have been changed for this year.
Now, you get a flavor of where the league is going on things, and with that in mind, I know the NCAA is now studying the idea of eliminating kickoffs. Dean Blandino, the supervisor officials, has talked about they might consider the same thing. How long do you think it's going to be the kickoffs are going to be part of this game?
I think it's an evolutionary process that's in the making. And I think within the next 3 to 5 years, kickoffs will not be allowed. I know I supervise officials for Conference USA. And in the discussions about the rules for the NCAA we have already have the touchback at the 25, but we've talked about after a score, giving the ball to the receiving team at the 25 automatically, unless the team that's kicking off requests to kick off. And it's the teams that are kicking off that have been injured the most. So why would you allow them to have the option? That way, if you get toward the end of a half or the end of the game, you could have an onside kick. And that would still allow for the onside kick, but if it wasn't going to be an onside kick, after a score, you just say put the ball to 25.
From your read, who's going to make the move first? Will it be college or the NFL on possibly eliminating the kickoff?
That's difficult to say. I don't think within the coaching ranks that there's a big move for it right now. I think it'll come more administratively. And if that's the case, I think probably colleges move a little bit slower than the NFL does.
Big picture, too, when you're looking at officiating, it looks like we're going to go through an amazing time with the technology that is available, the HD TV, the replay, those different things. I know Dean Blandino's, now talking about putting chips in the football and experimenting with this. Where is it going technologically that it can help improve officiating?
Well, the toughest call to make as it relates to the goal line is, did the runner score or not? So they're talking about putting a chip in the football so you can tell if the ball penetrated the goal line. And you look at that and say, well, that's great, until you think about, was there a body part other than the hand or a foot that was down before that penetration of the goal line occurred? That part will still be difficult, but you can see what they're trying to accomplish. There has been discussion for maybe 20 years about having a laser line down the line to gain to see if the team made a first down, and using that to see if it's penetrated. But then again, those are usually dives into the line, and you need to know it's two parts. One, did they break that plane? Two, was some body part other than the foot or the hand touched before that occurred? So those things will get looked at, but it's got to be more sophisticated, I think, in some form, and I don't know where that sophistication would come before you could say this is a reality.
Talking to Gerry Austin about officiating, go back when you were officiating and how few things that you had as resources, because it was just your eyes, the flag, and that was about it. Now you have communication in the ear with New York, and every official can communicate because they have that ability. I'm sure they'll be getting some chips and things like that. I mean, how much more now is on the officials as far as technological thing than you had when you were officiating?
Well, I think what's more on officials now is that everybody in the country can see things that the officials don't even get the opportunity to see. They're blocked out by the players that are on the field when a camera can zero in on a play that occurs. And you may be at home looking at something that wasn't available to the officials on the field. So the scrutiny has definitely increased over the years. I know when I first got into the NFL, we didn't have video. We had 16 millimeter tape film, and you had a film projector, and you couldn't go frame by frame. You ran it forward and back and forward and back, and if you ran it forward and back too many times, then it burned a hole in the film. So you were limited on that. So with the increase in video and the increase in availability and the number of cameras at the game and the ability to go frame by frame, it's created a greater scrutiny. But what has it done for the officials? It's actually a training aid. Whenever your game is over, and even in preparation for your game, you get to see so much video that helps you understand what this play, how it should have been called, what's the best way to call it, how to be in the best position to see the play. We didn't have that when we started. You just put your flag in your pocket, your whistle around your neck, and you went out on the field, and you were basically a spectator on the field making judgments.
And finally, I know we talk about the wording, and I think in some ways some of the wording has made it so confusing with the catch. I know that Dean Blandino wanted to try to simplify it. Is the way that they're doing it, from what you saw in Dallas, going to make it easier for officials to determine a catch? Because I think it has been so confused coming from New York the last several years.
Well, I think probably the confusion came from different decisions being made by replay than how the rule is written. Now, the rule's been in place for more than 10 years. And even if you go back further than that, when Art McNally was the supervisor, Art always said, control the ball 2 feet on the ground, do something else. It was never put in writing. Well, 10 or so years ago, they put it in writing. And that hasn't changed. It has sometimes they've gotten a little too, I don't want to use the word cute, but I'm going to say a little cute and trying to say, oh, look, he did turn. No, clearly, and that word comes in, clearly do something else with the football. It was worded a football move, and people say, well, define a football move. Well, the way it's defined is control the ball 2 feet clearly on the ground and clearly do something else. Make another move, do something else. And if you will apply those on each and every pass play, then we'll get consistency back in the ruling. And the inconsistency, in my opinion, came from some of the replays not following the letter of the rule.
Well, Gerry Austin, clearly you've educated us on what's the current state of officiating and where it's heading, and I thank you for joining us.
John, it's always great to talk with you.
Good news, everyone! It's time
to ask the professor.
Actually, through the miracle of science, that can be arranged.
Today we have our question of the day, where you send it on the hashtag Clayton Schooled on Twitter, and it comes from Risa W., who asked, the NCAA uses 8 refs, while the NFL uses 7. Why the difference, and would adding 1 help in the NFL? And I think it's an inevitability that they are going to 8, and they've experimented and will experiment with the idea. I mean, the problem basically is a union thing, because now you're talking about adding union jobs, and you have to open negotiations, and that's inevitable that I think you will be seeing 8 officials in the National Football League. And they've increased the crews now to a point where they're 124. They have reserve crews because you do have maybe I'd say 3 or 4 officials each year that suffer injuries, and so that's something that you can anticipate 8 eventually. And of course, it's a good thing. I mean, you can see that it's not a money issue or anything like that. The NFL is not trying to be cheap about this, but when you open up any union negotiation, then it becomes more complex. And so in time, and I'm not even sure how long it's going to take, but I would imagine in a short period of time. One thing that I think, Risa W., is that when you look, there's a lot of cooperating organizations that are kind of working together, and I think you can see there's more experimenting than ever before. I mean, for example, there's a good relationship that the NFL has with the NCAA. In fact, many NCAA officials and those who are running officiating departments in conferences work in the National Football League, where their part-time job may be working in a conference and taking care of all the officials there and trying to get that as a supervisor, and then they're out there on Sundays trying to work for the National Football League. And you got the CFL now working and experimenting with different things, and that eventually is going to lead to looking at the technology, getting the officiating better, and trying to be more precise in what's going on. Now, some people are wondering about how are rules made and changed in the National Football League and how it's changed through the years. I can tell you this: the competition committee starts with a survey, and they ask each coach and each general manager to submit what their thoughts are and what changes they would like to do. They get together at the combine, get together in the morning before the workouts and all those different interviews, and try to sit down, sort through that, and then come to a conclusion. They work very closely with the competition committee members and Dean Blandino and his staff in the National Football League. So once they start to come together, and they find out that as each year goes on, there's less demand for change. which is kind of surprising because you figure everybody's going to be complaining about a call, and when some call does not go right for a team, then they're going to be complaining and trying to make changes. Well, the way it goes is that they come back and it's kind of streamlined. Then once they get to the point, they'll go down to Florida and have it about maybe a week or two before the owners meeting to sort out what they're going to propose to the owners and what they're going to propose to the coaches, and then they'll meet at the owners meeting each year and they'll vote it in. One thing that's been so improved, and this is since they've had Jeff Fisher, they also used to have Don Shula, and you got different people that have been running it. They're very efficient in getting the things passed that they want, and that's because they go and vet this process. They go through all the things that they think can get passed, and their success rate is now to a point where I think it's about 95 to 98%. They usually get the things that they want. You also have the commissioner wanting to make adjustments in the game, and he's the one, for example, that came up with the idea and pushed it maybe against some of the wishes of members of the competition committee of having the extra points at the 15-yard line, because he thought that was becoming a boring play and he wanted to add more excitement for it. And so what usually happens, and the coaches kind of laugh about this each year, if there's some rule that the coaches don't like and there's some rule that the owners do like, they'll end up tabling that motion and taking it to the May meeting. And in that May meeting, where it's owners and not coaches and not too many general managers, they usually get those things voted in. And so if it gets past that owners meeting each March and it goes to May, when they have the owners meetings at different parts of the country, then you usually have things that the coaches don't like get passed. But it's a process where you're going to see much more experimenting, much more looks at things, and trying to use the technology, because the technology is getting so good, particularly with the pictures, with the HD cameras, and also some of the tracers and some of the chips and things like that you can put in footballs, maybe go on the field. One thing I know that Bill Belichick has been pushing for the last several years is to get cameras on the goal lines more and use that to judge touchdowns, out-of-bounds plays. They're worried that you put it in a spot that's not going to be healthy for the player because he may trip over it, and you don't want anybody injured. But overall, there's a lot of work in the National Football League and officiating. They try to make it better every year. Some years are good. Some years are a little bit of a setback. But overall, you can see officiating's a big thing, and it's getting bigger each year. That's it for this week's edition of Schooled. You can follow me on Twitter at ClaytonESPN and send me your NFL questions with hashtag ClaytonSchooled for a chance to get your questions on the podcast. If you have a minute, please let's have a review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.